Guys, if you're loving my content, then do me a solid by smashing that subscribe button below. Welcome back to another Guild Wars 2 World vs. World Thief roaming video. I'm playing Daredevil with Dagger and Shortbow. So we start off against a Ranger. Rangers are generally a comfortable matchup for Thief, but you still need to respect their burst damage. I'm mainly to avoid the initial pressure and force them into defensive play. Once their burst window is gone, the fight becomes much easier to control. So next up we have an Elementalist. This one appears to be running a fairly squishy build. So after landing a clean opener, I know I want to keep the pressure high and prevent any chance of recovery. So they go into mist form, which doesn't really matter. So yeah. So the next engagement is a Thief. There appears to be some sort of lag involved, but I'm mainly trying to deny clean openers while using my own Dagger Storm to deflect some projectiles and the incoming pressure. That's enough to down them, and we shadow step for a storm. So the next we run into a Willbender. Willbenders can put out a huge amount of damage, but they are also vulnerable. So if you survive the initial burst, they are done for. So we run into another Willbender shortly afterwards. It feels like the same one. So at this point they are trying to disengage, but the mobility of the Thief is one of its biggest strengths, so I can continue to apply pressure while staying relatively safe. So once I see an opening, I'm able to finish the fight cleanly. So next up we have an Engineer. So engineers can be difficult because of their area denial and sustained pressure. After avoiding the initial burst, I decide to reset the fight rather than continue trading in a position that favors them rather than me. So the next fight is against another Thief, but this appears to be more of a condition oriented setup. So against condition Thieves, positioning becomes especially important. I'm trying to stay unpredictable while continuing to pressure them whenever an opportunity appears, eventually trying to put more pressure that they can maintain. Finally, I'm able to pressure them down, and I just finish them off safely. So next we have an Engineer. So this ends up being one of the longer fights in the video, and it's a good example of why Engineers can be difficult opponents for Thieves. The Engineer isn't necessarily threatening because of its direct burst damage. The real problem is all the area denial they create. Every time I want to engage, I'm also having to think about where I can safely stand and where I can't. Early on, I avoid some of the initial pressure, but I don't really see a favorable opportunity to commit. At this point, I decide to reset. A lot of players treat resetting as if it's a sign they're losing the fight, but that's not how I look at it. The current position favors the Engineer, so there is no reason for me to continue trading into it. As a thief, one of my biggest advantages is being able to choose when engagements happen. So instead of forcing damage, I disengage, wait for some cooldowns, and look for a better opening. You'll notice that I'm constantly changing position here. Part of that is avoiding damage, but part of it is also forcing the engineer to guess where I am going to appear next. The more uncertain they are about my position, the harder it becomes for them to land meaningful pressure. Eventually, I manage to land a decent burst. Even though my health isn't particularly high at this point, I know I've finally managed to shift momentum in my favor. But even after the down, I'm still careful. Engineers can remain surprisingly dangerous while down, so I keep my distance and make sure the kill is secured before moving on. So moving on, we find another ranger. Rangers are still generally one of the more comfortable matchups for thief because the mobility advantage available to us. As long as I avoid unnecessary damage and keep control of the engagement distance, this is another fight against the same engineer, and because we've already fought earlier, both of us have a much better idea of what the other player wants to do. One mistake a lot of players make is becoming overconfident after winning an earlier engagement. I try not to do that. The engineer still has access to all the same tools that made the matchup difficult the first time. Early on, I'm mainly probing for weakness rather than looking for a kill. I want to see how they are positioning, what cooldowns they are willing to commit, and whether they are making any mistakes I can exploit. Again, patience becomes really important. There are several moments where I could force the issue, but the risk isn't worth it. The engineer is putting down enough pressure that one bad trade could completely swing the fight. Instead, I continue looking for smaller advantages. Every successful burst, every avoided cooldown, and every reset gradually shifts the fight in my favor. One thing I always find interesting about these longer roaming fights is that they are often decided long before the kill actually happens. By the time the engineer finally goes down, the fight has already been won through positioning, patience, and resource management. The down itself is just the final result. The next engagement starts involving multiple enemies, including another thief. The thief immediately becomes my priority target. The reason isn't necessarily because they're the easiest to kill, but because they are the opponent most capable of matching my mobility and creating problems later. So my strategy is that if I can remove the thief first, the rest of the fight becomes much easier to manage. So I'm able to secure the down and get the stomp before shifting my attention to the remaining opponents. So at this point, the Berserker isn't nearly as threatening because I know I can disengage from him whenever I need to. So as more players arrive, the situation becomes increasingly chaotic. In larger fights, target selection becomes even more important than damage output. I'm looking for isolated players, overextensions, and opportunities created by other people's mistakes. I can use Dagger Storm to create pressure while protecting myself from some of the incoming damage. That's a good strategy. Now that there's a Willbender that has joined the fight as well, the things have become increasingly more dangerous for me. So other team players are coming in as well. So I've located a vulnerable enemy and I've downed him, and finally I stomp over them. So overall, some really enjoyable fights in this session with a good mix of duels, long engagements, and larger skirmishes. As always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next roaming video.